a brief share of what NIAC, who is sponsoring this event, does and all the great things that Colorado NIAC has gotten into recently. We want to acknowledge and thank our wonderful co-sponsors of this event. The Word, a storytelling sanctuary, is a local nonprofit that promotes creatives from marginalized communities and create safe spaces for them to share authentic stories. We're very thankful for them. We're also thankful for Lighthouse Writers Workshop. It's the largest literary arts center in the Rocky Mountain West, and they provide writers and readers of all ages and levels and backgrounds instruction, community events, and support for their writing. And they're just a phenomenal local organization we're really lucky to have. Back to NIAC. NIAC, for those of you who may be familiar or not so familiar, is National Iranian-American Council. It's a nonprofit founded in 2002 to give voice to the Iranian-American community. Their goal is to educate, to engage the Iranian-American community, and to advance grassroots advocacy, lobbying efforts in DC, and the engagement of political candidates in all kinds of conversations about our priorities of the community in areas of peace and diplomacy, equitable immigration, civil rights, human rights, and political power. Now, NIAC Colorado, which is where our debut author of the evening is from, has been really involved, and some of their local activities include putting together a 3-panel discussion on the Iran nuclear deal. One took place at the University of Denver, and another 2 were done virtually. Another event is a small group of volunteers who are currently trained and ready to serve as cultural mentors with a newly arrived Afghan refugee group. And this is being done in partnership with Lutheran Family Services. Now, in addition to these wonderful local efforts, NIAC in general, and especially NIAC Colorado takes a lot of pride in their Iranian-American heritage and celebrates the artists and the activists in our community that we are so incredibly proud of. And it brings us to why we're here tonight. We want to acknowledge and discuss the different topics that are brought up in the works of these artists. We want to celebrate them and the positive impact that they've brought to our community, to our country, and everyone that their work has touched. And these 2 amazing Iranian-American females are authors that we have with us this evening. And I'm just so humbled to be among these ladies tonight, and inspired as an aspiring author myself. And we're here especially to celebrate one particular author's success, having been recently published, and her book just came out last week. She's our debut author for the evening. And here to introduce her and to facilitate the discussion and the question and answer with her is Neda Maghbouleh, and Neda is going to be leading us in our main discussion with Olivia Abtahi and her new book, Perfectly Parvin. Neda is an associate professor of sociology and Canada Research Chair in Migration, Race, and Identity at the University of Toronto. Neda, in 2017, published The Limits of Whiteness, Iranian-Americans and the Everyday Politics of Race, which is like one of my favorite books in my bookshelf right now. As Canada Research Chair, she studies the racialization of Iranian, Syrian, and Middle East North American region newcomers in the United States and Canada. And she does this with the purpose of understanding how migration, borders, war, sanctions, and surveillance influence racial identity. Wow. Neda lives in Toronto with her husband and daughter. In August this year, she begins a fellowship at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver. So humbled to introduce her. Welcome, Neda.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shadi John, for such a kind introduction, and to all of you for being here, and especially to NIAC for organizing this celebration of one of the most exciting emerging artists and writers in this cohort of young people. I can't wait to tell you more about her and to dig into this book. So Olivia, I get the honor of introducing you. I'm going to do a little bio right now. So Olivia is a film director and writer based in Denver, Colorado. Born to Iranian father and an Argentine mother, she is a melting pot of distinct cultures. Growing up in the DC area, Olivia always had a passion for cinema and storytelling. She's a graduate of NYU Film School and VCU Brand Center, mashallah, and she has lived in New York, San Francisco, Richmond, Virginia, and Dublin, Ireland. She holds a BFA and a master's SC. What is that, Olivia? MASC?
A master's of science in communication, but then the program changed to like an MBA thing. So it doesn't hold any weight. Don't worry.
Well, I bet most Iranians want you to amplify the MBA. So we'll just edit that part. Okay, yeah. So her debut novel, Perfectly Parvin, is published with Penguin Random House Putnam Books for Young Readers. In her spare time, she enjoys watching music videos, laughing so hard it hurts, and hunting down gluten-free pastries. She currently lives in Denver, Colorado with her husband and daughter. And it is so nice to be on Zoom with you, Olivia. Hey.
Thank you so much, Neda. That was so sweet.
So if you don't have it, please get out and get this book. This is my coveted early edition of Perfectly Parvin. This book has everything. It covers identity, gender, sexuality, geopolitics, all in this beautiful package of a heartwarming coming of age story. So if you don't mind, I want to just dig into some of the storytelling. And because you and I a little bit know each other, we might go deep.
We do.
Yeah,
I'm ready. I'm ready. Okay. I've been saving all my good answers just for my Iranian-American crew.
Oh, thank you so much. We get the sort of special, I think, glimpse. And I hope that some of the questions I'm going to ask, I think they would be of a wide appeal to like the full range of readers, but I hope also to maybe tease out some of the pieces that I think might be like the most exciting for this particular audience, right? People who have some kind of a connection to the Iranian-American community.
Totally.
So let's start with sort of toward the beginning of the book. We are introduced to our heroine, Parvin Mohammadi. Parvin begins her tale sort of in the dog days of summer. School is going to start soon. She's going to be a freshman in high school. And it's that relatable story of like a first crush that then transitions right into that first relationship that a teenager has. But Parvin gets this heartbreaking message, right, that she's too much. She's told she's too much. She's too loud, right? And she ends up getting negged. And this is sort of the beginning of the book. It's the first cringe moment. And we're going to have some more cringe moments throughout too.
So many.
So I want to know, like, where did this inspiration come from, right? About characterizing your heroine as someone who others might think of, right, as too loud, too much. I think so many of us can relate to that characterization.
Yeah, I think as an Iranian-American, the issue of desirability came up a lot for me growing up, especially I started freshman year, like 10 days into school, 9/11 happened, and my desirability just like plummeted. And I had this idea of kind of interrogating that tension. I feel like growing up, the things that were beautiful back then are not synonymous with what being Iranian looks like. Back then, you know, women tweezed their eyebrows and like thick eyebrows like mine were like not desirable. And so I really wanted to explore that a little bit more. And then, yeah, Parvin's just a loud girl. She has opinions. I think we call women loud when they have opinions. We just call men when they have opinions. And growing up, that was something I struggled with too. I noticed that the more opinions I had, the less desirable I became. So that's something that Parvin struggles with a lot, especially because she's just so fun and vibrant and she has a lot to say, but she's also never had a boyfriend before, and all of her friends are kind of pairing off. It's that age where, you're past some of the middle school awkwardness. A lot of folks are like, it's cuffing season, if you will. And
What is that?
Cuffing season? It's when you cuff, you're like attached to someone, cuffed.
Is that a regional thing, or like, am I just that much older than you that I don't know what cuffing season is?
It's what the kids are saying these days. Maybe I'm not using it right. Maybe it's also like a horrible, like, terrible thing to say. But this is what I've
No,
heard,
it's just that
on
I'm
these
old.
streets.
Keep going. Ignore me.
It's an Americanism. You're in Canada, so I'm not sure things translate. So yeah, she's like, all right, like, what's it gonna take to get a guy to like me? And so that's when she decides to kind of tone down these loud parts of her personality and aspire to some of these more Eurocentric beauty standards that she notices are kind of in vogue.
Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit about some of the other characters that fill out the story. Broadly speaking, like Parvin's closest crew of friends, the BFFs, they identify as queer POC of like so many different stripes, everything from their kind of, cultural and ethnic heritage through their interests and their hobbies is like this really exciting mix. Each of the characters is rendered very unique. Can you tell us a little bit more about this cast of characters?
Yeah, I've had some people like, read a summary of the book who are like, wow, are you just like trying to check off like a diversity checklist? And I'm like, see, I grew up outside of DC, and this is just what it was like. So I grew up in Northern Virginia, where to this day, that's the most diverse place I've ever lived in my life. You didn't just ask someone from China, like, oh, do you speak Mandarin? You're like, oh, do you speak Mandarin or Cantonese, or are you speaking Taiwanese? Because I hear there's more tones. And it's like, you just knew that about, your classmates, right? Or like, oh, you're from India, like what part? Because it's a huge country. And it's like, oh, you're Punjabi, like, so is my friend Pavid over here. And like, that's just how it was. So for Parvin's kind of universe, I really wanted to show what a diverse high school could look like, right? Because I feel like so many books have like the one brown friend, and they're always like sassy and they're like a sidekick who has like no life of their own. But for this book, we have Parvin's BFF's Ruth Song, who is Korean-American, and she identifies as pansexual, who is obsessed with crafting to like an unhealthy degree. And her other BFF, Fabian Castor, who is Mexican-American, and he identifies as gay. And like all DC kids, his parents work downtown. His family works for the Mexican embassy. And so he's dealing with some stuff because his parents are never home. They're dealing with issues at the border. And so he's struggling a lot, despite the fact that he's a huge social media influencer and he has a zillion fans and followers, which is really fun to kind of throw in throughout the book. Not only that, there is the school arsonist / 90s hip hop enthusiast, Emerson Chang. We've got Ruth's kind of crush, Naomi Johnson. We have just this really rich cast of characters, not because I was trying to make it like as diverse as possible, but just because I wanted to replicate high school that I went to and how fun it was. And then, in the Iranian-American side, she has her Farsi class, which if you grew up in the DC area, I'm sure we all went to the same Farsi school. And her buddy in Farsi class is named Amir. And we've got Parvin's aunt, who is in Tehran, and they love to Skype each other and do makeup tutorials through video chat. And also her MSR just kind of offers life advice. So we've got a whole kind of crew rooting for Parvin, even if she feels like sometimes she's the only one on her team.
I'm so glad you brought up the Farsi classes because this wasn't quite a cringe moment, but it was just this moment of like deep relatability, the way that you rendered like sort of some very like specific things that I think rang so true. Everything from the fact that the Farsi classes like sort of are taking place in another building that's usually used for another purpose, right? Which is not like definitely the standard. In some cities, there's like Persian organizations that have been able, right, to mobilize and to, lease or buy their own buildings so that like the classes are always there. But growing up in Portland, Oregon, right, this was always rented space or shared space. And so this idea, right, that it's this like roving group that on Sundays or on Saturdays kind of encroaches into this like shared space of another group, right? And that was like such a nice little detail you included. There's just so many others. So can you say a little bit more about why you felt it was important to have this like, sort of experience of Farsi classes as part of this book?
Yeah, so Parvin, like me, is half Iranian-American. Her mom is just like Western European Caucasian, and her dad's Iranian. And I wanted to have the Farsi school there because number one, I went to Farsi class, and I'm going to make my characters suffer as much as I did growing up. But number two, I wanted to show how Parvin struggles with this side of her identity, right? She, at school, sometimes she feels like she's not white enough. And then at Farsi school, she's like not Iranian enough. And throughout the book, we get to use poetry as the way that Parvin's learning Farsi, which is what I was taught as well. And it was really fun because, like when you're watching a movie and like the characters are watching TV in the background that has like something to do with the plot of like the main storyline. It was fun because I could find all these poems that like, were addressing Parvin's inner turmoil at the time. But Parvin really struggles in Farsi class. And I think it's really just a tension between like bookish Farsi, like ketabi, and spoken Farsi. It's just all this classical poetry is kind of doing her head in. On top of that, her beginner class didn't have enough people to keep going. So she's glommed into like the intermediate Farsi, which makes it just so much harder. So that's when Parvin kind of gets this full Iranian Farsi buddy, Amir, who leads her through and sometimes makes her feel not Iranian enough. So it was nice to have this crew. Parvin is kind of code switching throughout the book. With her BFFs, she's acting a certain way. With her parents, she's acting a certain way. And then in Farsi class, she's acting a certain way as well. So it was nice to kind of show these different sides of the same person. And I think that's where the concept for the book came from, the cover, because I remember they're like, Olivia, what expression do you want her to have on the cover? And I was like, I think she needs all the expressions because she's going through them. So it was really fun.
Oh, that's so cute. Yeah, I mean, the like friendship that she strikes with Amir Shirazi is like definitely there's several like very heartwarming plots that you weave so nicely together, but the development of their friendship and the way that they sort of like mutually help each other, right? Address some of their just some of their struggles is like really, really heartwarming. But I have to also say, like, I really enjoyed that Parvin had like these different love interests who you introduce us to throughout the book. And so it's not the kind of thing where you start out the book thinking, oh, like this is her crush and this is who she's going to end up being. We hit all those beats, right? Where there's like multiple suitors who, make their sort of appearance throughout the book, whether it's Amir or any of the other sort of foils for Parvin. I wanted to know your inspiration. Like, did you have particular people in mind from your life or maybe like famous people? I just want to know, like, how do you create these love interests for the protagonist? And I really wanted to know what Amir looks like. Anytime you specified what Amir looked like, I was like here for all the details, trying to imagine Amir Shirazi.
I mean, the sad thing is that there isn't like a movie star that I can be like, that's who Amir Shirazi looks like, because he doesn't exist yet. But all these love interests really just came from my desire to have a fun, joyful, like rom-com for an Iranian-American girl. And there's so many, when I was growing up, anytime there was a Middle Eastern protagonist, I think the big book back then was like Towelhead. If you've read that book, it's just like miserable. It's just trudging through awful stereotypes. And it's just, if you're a 14-year-old girl from that region reading that book, you're like, wow, like I'm never going to find someone. And I just wanted to have a fun, lighthearted, bubbly, sparkly, like teen book full of boys and crushes, just full of boys and crushes. And so A lot of the love interests were inspired by real life. There's a boy in her class named Sir. He prefers to go by Sir, even though people can't pronounce Parvin's name properly. He insists on being called Sir, who's definitely inspired by the boys in high school at my age who are like obsessed with Panic at the Disco and The Matrix and wore like floor-length trench coats year round. No clue why. They also, for some reason, had very long hair. There's another character, Emerson Chang, who I mentioned, the arsonist slash like school bad boy. His nickname is Cherry Bomb Chang at school. He was definitely inspired by, I think there's a show, Fresh Off the Boat, that kind of taps into this like cross-pollination between East Asian culture and hip hop, that like, that's what a lot of, you know, Chinese kids at my school were into, which I thought was fun. Gosh, Maddie Fumero, who is kind of
Maddie.
like,
Of course, there had to be a hottie named Maddie.
I know. His real name is Matias. He's also bisexual, which I think was really fun. There's always that boy at school who's just so creative and dramatic. He's in all of the creative arts. He's so soulful and can just stare into the distance and will show you his favorite places to think. There's always that kind of archetype too. So it's really just all of these archetypes that I grew up with, and it was really fun kind of throwing them all together. And then of course we have Amir, who doesn't really fit any of these boxes because he likes Parvin just the way she is, which is very confusing to her. But it was really fun to make an Iranian-American man desirable in the book and show that like, hey, like Iranian-American guys can be, you know, the main crush too, because I feel like anytime you bring up an Iranian-American actor or, you know, someone who looks like that from the region, they're usually the terrorist in a TV show, right? So it was nice to just show like, hey, these Iranian boys have feelings and hopes and dreams, and they have crushes as well. So I kind of had to build him from the ground up, unfortunately. Wasn't anything I could draw from, but it was really fun nonetheless.
Well, I think it's like really, really just such a beautiful addition to like some of the beloved characters, not just Parvin, but Amir. There's someone different that we haven't seen yet represented in our community. And it really stuck out to me as like, I wanted to ask you who your inspiration was, if you had one. And I love that Amir is sort of a representation of a lot of like the sort of hopes that you had, right? About just that character and how that character might exist in the world. I think that's really cool. I think I have like 10 more minutes with you all to myself before we bring in the audience with their Q&A. So now I have to start to get choosy. I have like 15 other questions that I've written down here. Let me ask one that has to do again with sort of these pieces about Iranian everyday life that you've integrated so beautifully. I love all the little details you had. Like, for example, two of them is Parvin's parents, like they don't do a lot of cooking, and oftentimes they're pulling dinner together really quickly. So they're eating like hazari, right? Like a little bit of feta cheese, a little bit of bread, maybe like some cucumber or watermelon or something. Another little like just kind of quirk of the culture that you have integrated so nicely is how as a form of affection, right, we call that person by what they would call us. So for example, like my daughter is 7 years old and I call her mommy. Like when she gets hurt, I'm like, oh, mommy, come here, you know? Yeah. And so like, just tell me a little bit more about the decision to include all of these little like cultural nuances and quirks in the book. And what's maybe like one of your favorite ones that you were able to sneak in?
Okay, well, my favorite one, just to start, is there's a scene where Parvin admits to Amir that she has never had abgusht before, and he is just like scandalized. He's like, what is going on? He like texts his mom. He's like, mom, like my Farsi like classmates have never had abgusht before, and she's like, bring her over now. And so that's kind of Parvin's first glimpse into like a fully Iranian-American's home. And she's like, okay, everything is gold. There's gold chairs, there's gold tables, the glasses are like rimmed in gold, and then she's like, and there are just bowls of fruit everywhere, and she's like, and are cucumbers a fruit? Because there's cucumbers randomly in these fruit bowls. And I thought that was like my favorite thing, because growing up, when I needed a snack, my dad would be like, here's a cucumber with some salt. He'd like cut it up and serve it. And like, it wasn't until like 8th grade, I think some friends came over and they're like, do you have any snacks? And I was like, oh yeah, like here's a cucumber with some salt. And she was like, I kind of meant like flavor blasted goldfish. And I was like, what? And so I wanted to kind of sprinkle these little things in there because I didn't want it to just be a book for, Iranian Americans with all these inside jokes. I did want to explain the culture and like be proud about it, right? And like mention these things instead of glossing over them so that people could both understand and appreciate all of these kind of nuances. So it was really fun just being a tiny tour guide in a way, just to like this Iranian American life and showing off, some of the cool parts.
This question might kind of come out of left field, but I'm afraid that if I don't ask it, maybe somebody else won't ask it in the Q&A. So I'm going to take a just leap. What has been your favorite age so far in your life? Because you render like adolescent life so lovingly, it made me think like, did you have a really good teenagehood or something? Like, was that actually your favorite era of your life? So I'm curious what your favorite age has been.
I feel like my teenage years, there are days where I'm like, they were awesome. And then there's days where it's like, I remember stuff and I'm like, ooh, like, wait, that was not right. I think my favorite age, honestly, is right now because I just became a mom and I feel like I finally stepped into, it's not my purpose, but like one of my purposes, and it just feels really nice. But what is interesting is that my husband is someone who went to high school with me. So while I'm like working on this book, I would be like, is it like, did this really happen? And he'll be like, oh yeah, like I remember that. Or is it true that like they assigned us this like, book in like the Count of Monte Cristo in ninth grade? Cause that's like a big book and that's featured in Perfectly Parvin. And he's like, yeah, like that was nuts. And so it's fun because I can like, there are other people who can move on from those moments in their life in like a healthy way, whereas my husband and I are forever kind of stuck in our high school bubble. And we have close friends also from that age as well. So I wouldn't say they're my favorite, but they're definitely the age that I just can't quit.
I think that's so cute. Yeah, I sort of knew that bit about your personal background, that you've been with your husband, right? That's somebody that you've known since high school. And I think that kind of makes sense because I understand how the people that live with us, that support us during our writing projects and our research projects, right? Like they end up having a really big influence and imprint on what we're doing. So I think that's cool. Then is your husband also sort of a sounding board as you think through ideas for like your creative projects? I want to hear a little bit more about your dynamic.
Oh, totally. My husband is also just a huge nonfiction reader. Like he does not enjoy fiction at all. Like I'll be like, can you read this book about a 14-year-old girl? And he's like, great, can't wait. But when we're like, just pinging ideas off of each other, yeah, he helps me a lot. And what's really wonderful is that for the book I'm working on now, the protagonist is Iranian-American once again, and she has a romantic entanglement with, a Western European Caucasian boy. And, my husband is white. And it's just been so interesting with me being like, so like, did your parents let you leave the house with wet hair? And he's like, yeah, like, why are you asking? I'm like, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Or I'd be like, so did you wear shoes in the house? He's like, yes, you've been to my house. We wore shoes. I'm like, I'm sorry, I thought I blacked out on that. That's ridiculous. And so I like can put all these little things in there because I just don't understand how those households work. So it's very, very helpful.
Okay, then maybe I'll keep this conversation with regard to like sort of your identity as a member of your family going. I think this might be my last question before we bring in the questions from the audience, but the inscription that begins your book is really touching. And it actually kind of took my breath away when I first read it. And it reappears as a theme throughout the book. But I'll read it right now. This is your inscription. You write, for all the daughters who look nothing like their mothers. I wanted to hear more about why you had that as sort of like the first thing we learn about you as the author. And also maybe a little bit about, like you said, that you've become a mom recently. Say more.
Yeah, did not realize that that inscription would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. I wrote it in 2018, and I wrote it because, you know, we talked about the plot of Parvin, all these things that happened to her, but a big story aspect of it is the fact that Parvin's in this growing body. When you're 14, one of the most awkward years of your life, right? You're just changing so quickly. And Parvin's mom is white, and she doesn't really know how to help Parvin through these changes. That was inspired from my own relationship with my mother. My mom is Argentinian, and she's a white Latina. So, you know, there's like moments in my life, like I still have chemical burns from Nair. Like back then you used Nair, and like I didn't know what I was doing. And like to this day, there's just like scars on my body from it. And my mom, you know, needs to pencil in her eyebrows. Like, why would she ever know what to do with Nair? Or I'm dealing with my curly hair. That's something that Parvin deals with as well. Incidents with hot wax abound, unfortunately. There is an unfortunate like shaving of eyebrows incident that's hinted at in the book. And I wanted to include that because there are things that you just have to teach yourself, and Parvin's struggling with those things. And so while you have all of these, you know, young women who are coming into their own and who are looking up to other folks who look like them, especially if they look like women in magazines and in the movies, they have these kind of role models. But Parvin's kind of just on her own with her Amesara and like YouTube tutorials. And yeah, I wrote that dedication in 2018, really just for any young girls who are struggling the same way. And I've had wonderful reactions from women who are, you know, maybe have white moms and black dads, or, you know, moms who don't look like them. And then my daughter was born, and she started with brown eyes, but they're blue now. I don't know where the red hair came from. None of us had red hair. It's like a cosmic joke. So yeah, when I say self-fulfilling prophecy, I wrote that book. I really dedicated that book to me and what I was going through, but never in a million years did I think that it would apply to my daughter as well.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. I think for me, something I didn't expect was just that like you wrapped things up in such a beautiful bow. Like every single thread gets pulled and it comes back together. And especially the arc with Parvin and her mom, who's not Iranian, like that touched my soul. I think maybe because I'm also a mom too, but something about like you pull all the threads, you close all the arcs really beautifully, but the arc between Parvin and her mom to me was like you nailed it. It was so well done. Just hats off. And I don't want to give away too much because surely there's going to be people in the audience that are going to buy this book right now. You have to get Perfectly Parvin. And I don't want to spoil it for them.
Thanks, Neda. That's so sweet.
Should I turn it back over to Shadi John from NIAC at this point? I think this is the amount of time I was given.
Hi, we have a lot of questions for Olivia. Thank you, Neda June. It was so fun. I have a friend who's in the audience who was texting me like, these two really have chemistry. I'm really enjoying the dialogue between these two and learning so much. So that was like awesome.
Well, I'll just interrupt really quick to say, yeah, I've known Olivia now for about 3 years.
Yeah.
I think it is. Just over email, like you hit me up because you found my book and you emailed me out of nowhere. Long story short, then like 2 weeks later, Olivia is at my parents' house, like the house where I grew up. She is on those golden couches with me with the like ornate Persian furniture in that weird living room nobody sits in except for like Dido Bozdid. And so we became fast friends, like within weeks of learning about one another. And so this has been really fun. Like we haven't spent a ton of time together, but it was a quick friendship. It happened really fast.
Well, are there meet cute for friendships? Because that's what it was.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot of audience questions for you, Olivia. And I'm going to start with the first one. It's how did you select the names of characters in the book? Parvin is not a new name anymore.
Well, in the book, we do kind of learn why her parents gave her that name. I grew up with names like Parvin in my kind of circle. But her, if you drive a Subaru, the logo for the Subaru is what Parvin means. It stands for the Pleiades, the constellation, and it's one of the oldest known constellations. And her dad talks about how, that's the reason why they named her after the stars. I think a lot of times in this country, people are so fixated on how to say your name and where your name's from that they forget that the names themselves have meaning and that those meanings are, beautiful. And so that's why I went with Parvin, because she's kind of this constellation of different girls who make up this like one beautiful image.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And like, how often do you have that opportunity to share that with somebody, unless they kind of like, take, ask you like, what does that mean?
Totally.
But, yeah. Okay. Second question. What is your writing process like?
Ooh, before children or after children?
Right. Both, maybe. It's interesting. Maybe you come up with more creative things after children.
I am a morning person for sure. I really love to just stumble downstairs to my computer and get my writing done first thing, because it's like my brain hasn't woken up enough to tell me that my writing is bad yet. My critical self is still dormant, and I'm kind of in this I'm awake, but like I get to kind of exist in this space where it's just me and the computer, and I'm too tired to listen to all the voices and reasons telling me no. And so now, of course, I am jolted awake by my child screaming. So I try to find time during naps. We have a nanny now. And I think now my writing process is just whenever I find the time, and I make it work. An author the other day was saying, sometimes I have good days and bad days. And I was like, any day I can get writing done is a great day for me. So I really just have to have the intention and say, you know what, maybe before I could write 2,000 words a day. And these days I'm like, I got my 500 words. I feel good about that. And it's more of a marathon, not a sprint. Right. Especially after, a kid, for sure.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. I had someone once say, even if you can do 10 minutes on your project a day, like it's just like those little incremental steps.
Absolutely.
Okay, next question. So many questions coming in. Wonderful. Writers often talk about how writing books makes us realize things about ourselves. I'm curious if you had a similar experience as you were writing this book. And I think you shared a little bit about this already.
Like, absolutely. A lot of the things Parvin goes through are things that I went through in high school. And I wrote this book before I had an agent, before I even knew how publishing worked. I really just wrote it for me. And I was just thinking of that time in my life. And I wanted to draw from that, wealth of experiences. So there was definitely a lot of overlap. That said, Parvin is so much cooler than me, y'all. She's so mischievous, and she pulls these incredible pranks. One of them involving a flute and a bag of hot Cheetos that I could never pull off in my wildest dreams. So some of it is my own personal wish fulfillment, for sure.
Yeah, it's your wish list. The ideas that you have, things you've thought about, but maybe you didn't do, but you would want to do. Parvin did them. All right. What was one thing you really, really wrestled with when you were writing this book?
There is a scene where Parvin, as we mentioned before, has all of these kind of suitors and like love interests and crushes. And there's a moment where she has to interrogate why she isn't crushing on Amir. And it's because he doesn't, it's because he looks like her. And that scene was really hard. My editor was like, why doesn't she have a crush on him back? He's so cute. He's funny. He's smart. She's like, what is going on? Like, get them together. And I kept, really struggling with that like union. And throughout the book, Parvin is internalizing all of these messages from society, from media, that the way she looks is not the standard of beauty. And she doesn't have anybody to look up to who looks like her. And Amir looks like her. He's got the big nose, he's got the tan skin, he's got the thick eyebrows, he's got the curly, unruly hair. And that scene nearly broke me because I didn't know what was holding me back. My characters knew more than I did. And I had to really sit with those feelings and realize that Parvin doesn't think that those things are beautiful, and that if she does think that they're beautiful, then is she wrong about everything else that she thought is, gorgeous and blonde haired and blue eyed and thin and perfect. So that was a scene I really, really wrestled with. And I will say that was one of the scenes where I was pregnant for a lot of this book, and I didn't know how to deal with that scene. And then I had a baby and I was like, oh, I know what's going on. So I thought that was interesting how these like sea changes happened and helped me complete that moment and understand these characters even better, and how they taught me a lot too.
Right. So we won't give away what happened, but you'll have to buy the book and read it. But that's really interesting, because she was just like looking in the mirror ultimately. Like she's just like looking at herself. That's awesome. Awesome to bring that up in the book. All right. What was okay, Parvin's relationship with Ahmet Sarah was so special. Was that inspired by your personal life?
Unfortunately, I didn't have an Sarah in that way. I have a ton of amazing Ammis, and they have been so helpful, especially now that I've got a child, and giving me wonderful advice and just support. But I didn't have an Amme who, I didn't have a strong female figure in my life to say, dude, like, what are you doing with this Nair? Like, why do you even want Nair in the first place? Why are you doing this to your body? Because I think a lot of, and my father is he's a man, and according to society, he doesn't have to do anything with his body hair, at least back then. And I really wrote Amma Sarah. That was the ultimate wish fulfillment. I wish I'd had a guide like that through my formative years. And I think the way the book plays out, Parvin doesn't only just have an Amma Sarah, she has other women who kind of step into this role and realize that all young children need heroes who look like them, who need leaders who look like them, be it in the classroom, having teachers who look like you, to just having people you admire who also share the same features you do. And I think that's really important, and that's why I wanted to highlight it.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing. Did your experience as a film director influence your writing? And do you have a desire to adapt your book into a film or a series?
Absolutely. Parvin herself is a really unreliable narrator. And as a filmmaker, the reason I didn't write this as a screenplay, honestly, is because I wanted to show that tension between what Parvin thinks is happening versus what is actually happening, without having a full Tyler Durden Fight Club moment, Mm-hmm. I think what's really cool is that after coming from the film world, a lot of what you're writing is limited by budget. So, there's scenes where Parvin is in an airport, for example, and I'd be like, oh gosh, like we can't afford to like rent out an airport in a film. But when I'm writing the book, I'm like, throw in that airport. We're gonna go to downtown DC. They don't need a permit for driving past the Washington Monument because it's a book. And I think that was really freeing after all these years in filmmaking, to just realize that, like, not only am I the director and the writer, I'm also the cinematographer. I'm the wardrobe designer. I am the choreographer for Fabian's incredible dance moves. I'm all of the roles from a movie set, just as an author. And I would love for Parvin to be adapted. I think it's just finding the right team that wants to tell the story of joy and not trauma, and just let an Iranian-American girl have, a fun childhood and not one full of like socio-political pain.
Yes, that's so freeing. I love that. How did you balance writing about things that are specific and recognizable to an Iranian-American audience while still keeping your writing accessible to a white audience?
My editor, 100%. Sorry, my editor is not white, by the way. She's a Black woman, but she would be like, what is going on here? Or there was a scene where in Farsi class, the teacher's like, all right, that's your homework, and no parents. And she was like, why would the teacher say no parents? And I'm like, because all immigrant children cheat on their homework if their parents speak the language. And she was like, okay, you need to explain that. So my editor, Stacey Barney, did a great job kind of marking these things. She's a really good advocate for the reader, and anticipating when the reader is going to have a question, saying, expand on this more. This needs to make more sense. I'm not quite sure what's going on here, especially in moments where Parvin's struggling with the written language of Farsi. There's a scene where Amir's going through the alaf lam, like conjoining thing that happens. My Farsi is terrible, but I still remember this too. And she was like, we really need to dig into this and help readers understand this completely new alphabet, right? In 3 paragraphs. So that was really fun and really tough.
Teaching Farsi moment. Yay. Do you see similarities between scroll up. They're coming in so much, got to scroll up. Do you see similarities between the Iranian American communities in DC and Denver? Could perfectly Parvin be set in Denver?
Oh my gosh. You know, I'm not sure. Denver is 70% white. Colorado is 70% white, I should say. Whereas where I grew up, it was just so much more diverse, and the makeup of her high school made more sense. I'm not sure it would make sense in Colorado, especially since Fabian's parents work for the embassy and we don't have a large embassy presence here. That said, I have worked on a manuscript, I don't know how much I can say, where there is an Iranian-American character who is sent to Denver and feels like a complete fish out of water. So there's some fun tension there. Obviously, this was before the NIAC Colorado chapter was created. So hopefully that can be a resource for him in the book.
To be continued. Did Parvin's family life mirror yours? We talked about that a little bit, but if you want to share, like Parvin's father won't speak Farsi with her, did you speak Farsi in your home or Spanish?
This was before studies had shown that children can be trilingual. At the time, they said that children can only really handle 2 languages at once. Now we know that's not true. You can really just throw as many languages as possible consistently. They'll be okay, but my parents did prioritize Spanish. My Spanish is so much better than my Farsi. It's not even close. And my mom and dad drove us every morning half an hour down the Beltway to a Spanish immersion elementary school because it was so important to them, even though they definitely didn't have the time to like make that happen. They're both working full time. But yeah, that part kind of mirrored it. You know, my dad spoke Spanish. They met in Madrid, but my mom didn't speak Farsi as fluently. So that was a decision that was made. And there is a kind of point of tension in Parvin's story where the dad's like, why would I speak Farsi at home when your mom doesn't speak Farsi? And it's kind of like, okay, well then when are you going to learn Farsi, Dad? So yeah, that was like one of these like cool moments where I could directly translate that into the book.
Yeah. I think it's important to understand and realize that like not all Iranian parents like, you know, speak Farsi with their children, or like, yeah, there's different mixes of like what happens in that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
In terms of identity development, what iterations would you say you've experienced across the Iranian American spectrum, and where are you now?
I feel like when I moved to Colorado, I went through puberty all over again. I feel like on the East Coast, people just knew where Iran was on a map, first of all, okay, like a baseline understanding. And I will say that, yeah, back then and pre 9/11 days, being Iranian-American meant you were white. You know, it wasn't anything to comment on too much. There was the hostage crisis, but by, you know, when I was in middle school, it wasn't really anything to like comment on the second someone reads your last name on like a class roster, right, on the first day of school. And then after 9/11, obviously being an Iranian-American meant something different, but moving to Colorado, I have never in my life had so many people say, you know, where are you from? And I'm like, DC. They're like, where are you from? And I'm like, you know, Washington Hospital Center. And they're like, no, where are your parents from? And I'm like, well, my mom's from Argentina. And they're like, uh-huh. And I'm like, and my dad's from Iran. And they're like, oh, okay, that explains why you don't look as white as I do. And I'm like, all right. You know, it's been really interesting. Never have I identified as brown so much than in Colorado. And that was a big change for my identity, especially since I moved here from Oakland, where I was working. It was like, you know, there's so many Iranians out there. So yeah, I definitely, I'm, it's been a metamorphosis for sure. And now I'm also the nanny because my child is so pale. I do not match up with her face. So I get questions all the time, which another self-fulfilling prophecy. If you read the book, similar things happen to Parvin's mom. So yeah, I have a feeling it's going to keep changing, and it's my identity as an Iranian American and as a Latina will keep growing for sure.
Yeah, and creating more books hopefully for us.
Yeah.
What is, now we know this book is categorized as young adult. For those who don't know the age of young adult, if you'll explain what that is. And we have an audience member who asks if this is appropriate for a granddaughter, although we don't know how old your granddaughter is. Will you just explain the age appropriateness for your book with everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So my book is for ages 12 and up. So it's really 6th grade and middle school is that's appropriate. I think anything younger, some things will be lost. It is a clean book. There's very little cursing. That said, the young adult category, you know, we have Parvin, who is struggling with, you know, how to just function in her new body, to Hunger Games, where Katniss is taking down the government, and those are all in the same category. So for young adult, this is a bit on the much younger scale. That said, when I was growing up, most young adult books did focus on this age range of 14, 15. And now today it's around 16, 17. Sometimes it's, you know, 20, 22 post-college years as well. So it's definitely expanded a lot, but yes, this book is for ages 12 and up.
Any thoughts on, you told us a little bit about another project you're working on. Can you give us any more clues about a next book?
Yes, I can. So my publicist said this is all I can say, but I am doing a retelling of the Shahnameh set in space. It's a middle grade novel, so it's younger than 12. It's kind of like ages 9 and 10, kind of and up, like the Percy Jackson age. So it follows our hero Rostam as he, you know, is kind of recreating some of the heroic moments of this Book of Kings, but on an exoplanet in a new solar system. So
oh my gosh,
that's really exciting.
So excited. That is incredible, because I've had Shahnameh in my library for years, and I don't dare like even tackle it because I'm like,
it is not maybe retelling is not the right word. It is, I'd say, loosely inspired. And then I am happy to say that the next book that will be published is in the Parvin universe over here. It follows another girl in her Farsi class who has vocal nodules and vocal cord issues, which is something I've had all my life, which basically makes you sound like Kurt Cobain when you're like 10 years old. And she is a songwriter. She wants to get her lyrics out there into the world, but since she can't sing them, she makes an unlikely alliance with one of the stars of the school lacrosse team to compete in the Battle of the Bands. So I'm excited for that.
Oh my gosh.
Next fall. Yeah.
So excited. So excited. I have two more audience questions and one question I've personally been wanting to ask you. Another audience member is asking, how do you feel about doing the story in community theater? The community would probably be fascinated. Is that something you'd like to consider?
Oh my gosh, I haven't even thought that far, y'all. Thank you for.
We have people wanting this to be TV shows, awesome. Movies, theater.
Just the fact that there's an audiobook even blows my mind, especially because it's narrated by an Iranian-American comedian, Mitra Juhari, who is hysterical. And that it's like, I can just die happy. Like anything beyond that is just like, you know, above my wildest hopes and dreams.
Well, you know, you have support. That's all I'm saying. Okay, actually, that is everything from the audience this evening. My last question to you that I've been really wanting to know is, you know, how did you decide to use humor in your writing when talking about like such serious issues? How did that come to be, and why was that important?
Yeah, I believe that a lot of Iranian-American stories are associated with trauma and hardship and despair. And I wanted to show what the current political narrative right now, especially when we were living under the Muslim ban, what it can do to children and how it can affect these young minds. But I also wanted to create a story of joy and love and hope. And I used humor to kind of I'm sure a lot of Iranian Americans are this way too, or folks watching. When you talk about, the circumstances that brought you to this country, a lot of the times it's a funny story, right? You're retelling it. You're not talking about how nervous you were, how you maybe escaped, or how you were waiting for a visa from another country. You're telling that story to your children as if it's like a fun, jaunt. At least that's how it was told to me. And I think for Parvin, she's processing a lot of these hard issues through humor. Like I said, she's a very unreliable narrator to the point that she doesn't realize the things that are happening to her are actually a big deal. And I think the humor not only makes it go down easier for her, but it makes it more believable, because never, I remember when the Twin Towers fell and I was like stunned, but I was also like, okay, so is Homecoming canceled? Because I'm 14 and like, that's what I'm thinking about. And never in the book is Parvin like, woe is me, like I'm living in this crushing socio-political climate that's like, not conducive to Iranian American culture. She's like, oh man, like, does this white boy not like me because I'm Iranian? Like, gotta get a date. And I think she's just not internalizing these things maybe the way an adult would. And so that's why the humor was so important to me, just to make it more relatable, but also to make sure that Parvin's just living in her skin and trying to find happiness and joy where she can.
Yes, and I feel like it really does a wonderful job of revealing just the internal dialogue that goes, but just expressing it publicly, right? Because this is what goes on in your head right after this sense of trauma, and you're processing, and then it just comes out sort of comedic in your mind. And to publicly express that is just we can just all breathe, you can breathe. I just love
Absolutely.
it so much. I love
Thank
it. Let's
you.
just all breathe together. Thank you so much, Olivia John. We are so excited for you, and you 100% like have our hearts, our support for this book, to just, go across the country and light up hearts as we connect through Parvin's story. And we look forward so much for more coming from you. So thank you.
Thank you, Shadi. Thank you. Thank you, Neda. Thank you, NIAC as well. I really appreciate this. This was so lovely, and I appreciate the support from the community. It's been incredible, and I'm so grateful. Thank you so much.
We'll be mailing out to all of the audience. We just want to let you know we have chosen 3 lucky winners, and we'll be mailing out 3 gifts of Neda Jun's book, The Limits of Whiteness, Iranian-Americans and the Everyday Politics of Race. So congratulations to those of you who will be getting a gift in the mail. Lucky summer read. And we want to just thank everyone so much for being here with us, being engaged and asking questions, or just being present to support. Again, ladies, we are so inspired by you, and thank you for everything this evening. Wishing you all a wonderful night.
Thank you all so much. Take care.
Thank you.